Commander Zixthor stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Council Station, his three eyes watching the stars beyond the transparent walls. He had fought in 17 major battles across his career. His scales bore the scars of plasma burns and blade strikes. Fear was not something his species understood well. The Krillians fought with cold logic and perfect calculation. Emotion was a weakness that other species carried into battle. The emergency session alarm echoed through the station corridors. Zixthor turned away from the stars and walked toward the council chamber. His footsteps were silent despite his massive frame. Around him, representatives from dozens of species hurried in the same direction. Something serious had happened. The chamber filled quickly. Zixthor took his position among the military advisors. At the center platform stood a human woman in a dark blue uniform. Zixthor had seen humans before but never paid them much attention. They were a young species, barely 200 cycles since they had discovered faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude compared to Krillian designs. Their weapons were loud and inefficient. Most council members considered them primitives who had stumbled into galactic society too early. The human woman stepped forward. Her name appeared on the translation display, Ambassador Lisa Grant, representative of Earth. "Members of the council," she began. Her voice was steady, but Zixthor detected a slight tremor. "The Devourers have entered human space. 3 colonies have gone silent. We need immediate military assistance," the chamber erupted in concerned whispers. The Devourers were a hive-mind species that consumed everything in their path. They had been pushing into council space for 5 cycles now. Dozens of worlds had fallen. The council had tried diplomatic solutions, containment strategies, and defensive lines. Nothing worked. The Devourers simply absorbed every defense and kept coming. "Your species lacks the military strength to face them alone," said Council Prime Vexnar. His tone was not unkind, merely stating fact. "What resources can Earth commit to a joint defense?" Lisa Grant's jaw tightened. "We have 47 warships ready for deployment. Another 100 in various stages of construction. Ground forces numbering 2 million trained soldiers, and the determination to protect our worlds at any cost." Some council members made dismissive sounds. 47 ships were nothing against the Devourer fleet. The Krillian Armada alone numbered 3,000 vessels. Zixthor found himself studying the human more carefully. She was small, barely reaching his chest in height. Her skin was pale and looked fragile. She had only 2 eyes positioned in the front of her head like a predator. Her species had evolved from persistence hunters, according to the database. They had climbed to the top of their food chain not through strength or speed, but through stubbornness and endurance. "I will lead a task force," Zixthor heard himself say. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him. "Commander Zixthor," said Vexnar, "you volunteer for this assignment? The Devourers must be stopped. Every world they take makes them stronger. If human space falls, they will gain more resources and expand faster. I will coordinate a joint defense with Earth forces." Lisa Grant looked at him with an expression he could not read. "Thank you, Commander." 3 days later, Zixthor arrived at the human staging area on the moon they called Luna. His shuttle descended toward a military base carved into the gray rock. The base was smaller than he expected. The architecture was blocky and practical, lacking the elegant curves of Krillian design. A human male waited at the landing pad. He wore a green uniform with the rank insignia of a captain. His hair was short and dark. He smiled as Zixthor descended the ramp. "Commander Zixthor, welcome to Luna Base. I'm Captain Jake Morrison. I'll be your liaison with human forces." Zixthor studied him. Jake Morrison stood casually with his hands at his sides. There was no formal salute, no rigid military bearing. He seemed relaxed, almost friendly. This was unusual. Most species treated first contact with proper protocol. "Captain Morrison, I wish to inspect your forces and review your tactical capabilities." "Sure thing. Follow me." They walked through the base corridors. Human soldiers passed them in both directions. Some nodded at Jake, others stared openly at Zixthor. None showed the disciplined formation march that Krillian troops maintained. They walked in small groups, talking and sometimes laughing. Their uniforms were clean but worn. Many carried personal items attached to their gear. "Your troops seem undisciplined," Zixthor observed. Jake smiled. "We're informal when not in active combat. Keeps morale up. But when the shooting starts, we get the job done." They entered the training facility. Zixthor watched human soldiers run through combat drills. They were slow compared to Krillian warriors. Their armor was lighter and offered less protection. Their weapons required physical projectiles instead of energy beams. By every logical measure, they were inferior fighting units. But something bothered Zixthor. The humans trained with an intensity he recognized. They pushed themselves hard, sweating and breathing heavily. When one soldier fell during an obstacle course, others stopped to help him up. They worked as units, covering each other with practiced precision. "How long do your soldiers train before deployment?" Zixthor asked. "Basic training is about 4 months. Then specialized training depending on their role. Some train for years before they see real combat. Krillian warriors train from hatching. By the time they reach maturity, they have 15 cycles of experience." Jake nodded. "Yeah, we heard. Your people are born warriors. Humans have to learn it. But we learn fast when we need to." A young human soldier approached them. He looked barely old enough to be in military service. "Captain Morrison, sir. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan requests your presence in the command center." "Thanks, Danny." Jake turned to Zixthor. "Our tactical officer wants to go over the joint operation plans." "Shall we?" In the command center, Zixthor met Lieutenant Kate Sullivan. She was a woman with red hair pulled back in a tight style. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She brought up a holographic display showing human space and the advancing Devourer fleet. "They hit our colony on Centauri Prime 2 weeks ago," Kate explained. 16,000 civilians. We evacuated 12,000 before communications went dark. We don't know what happened to the rest." Zixthor saw Jake's expression change. The casual friendliness disappeared for a moment, replaced by something cold and hard. Then it was gone, and the smile returned. "We're here to make sure that doesn't happen again," Jake said quietly. Over the next week, Zixthor prepared the joint task force. He requisitioned Krillian ships and coordinated with other council species. He reviewed human tactical databases and found their strategies confusing. They took risks that no logical commander would consider. They had concepts like acceptable losses, but then violated those same calculations to rescue small groups of soldiers. Their military history was filled with last stands and desperate defenses that should have ended in defeat, but somehow turned into victories. One night, Zixthor found Jake on the observation deck, staring at Earth. "You are concerned about your world," Zixthor said. "Always am. Got family down there. Sister and her kids. If the Devourers get past us, they will not. We will stop them." Jake looked at him. "You really believe that?" "Logic suggests our combined forces have a 73% chance of successful defense. And the other 27%? Zixthor did not answer. In his culture, warriors accepted death as a possibility. There was no fear, only calculation. Jake smiled sadly. "Well, Commander, here's the thing about humans. We don't care much about the odds. We just care about protecting what's ours. Those Devourers want to take our worlds. They're going to learn what happens when you threaten humanity." Something in his voice made Zixthor's scales prickle. It was not anger. It was something else. Something patient and cold and absolutely certain. For the first time in his life, Zixthor felt a sensation he did not recognize. A small whisper of uncertainty. A question about what he had volunteered to fight beside. The human called it determination. But standing there looking at Jake's calm face and steady eyes, Zixthor wondered if he was seeing something more dangerous than any weapon the Council had ever created. The joint fleet would deploy in 3 days. The battle for human space was about to begin. The mining colony on Outpost 7 was dying. Zixthor watched the tactical display from his command ship in orbit. Red indicators showed Devourer forces advancing through the colony sectors. Blue markers represented the defending forces falling back in organized retreat. The evacuation was proceeding according to plan. Zixthor had seen this scenario dozens of times. The mathematics were simple. The Devourers outnumbered the defenders 3-1. The colony's defenses would hold for perhaps 2 more hours. In that time, 70% of the civilian population would reach the evacuation ships. The remaining 30% would be lost. It was unfortunate but acceptable within standard military doctrine. "Commander," said his communication officer, "Captain Morrison requests permission to deviate from the evacuation plan." Zixthor felt his scales shift in irritation. "Denied. All forces will maintain current positions. He says there are civilians trapped in the deep mining tunnels. The evacuation route was cut off. How many civilians?" "Approximately 200, Zixthor calculated quickly. 200 lives against the risk of losing ground forces trying to reach them. The tunnels were in Devourer-controlled territory now. A rescue attempt would require fighting through enemy positions with no guarantee of success. The logical choice was clear. Inform Captain Morrison that those civilians are beyond our reach. He will continue the evacuation as planned. There was a pause. Commander, Captain Morrison says he's going anyway. He's taking his Marines into the tunnels. Zixthor's claws gripped his command chair. That is a direct violation of orders. Those forces will be destroyed. His tactical officer, a Krillian named Thexvor, spoke up. Should we prevent their departure? Zixthor watched the display. Jake's unit was already moving, pulling away from the evacuation perimeter. 20 human Marines heading directly into enemy territory. It was madness. Let them go, Zixthor said finally. Mark them as lost. Continue the evacuation. For the next hour, Zixthor focused on coordinating the retreat. The evacuation ships were filling rapidly. The Devourer advance was steady and predictable. Everything was proceeding within acceptable parameters except for the 20 human soldiers who had vanished into the mining tunnels. Then his communication officer called out. Commander, I'm receiving a transmission from Captain Morrison. Audio only. Put it through. Jake's voice came through crackling with static. Command, this is Morrison. We've reached the civilians. We're bringing them out, but we need a path cleared. Can you give us covering fire on Sector 7 Alpha? Captain Morrison, you are 5 kilometers inside enemy territory. We cannot provide support at that range. Then we'll make our own path. Morrison out. Zixthor stared at the tactical display. Jake's signal was moving, but slowly. The Devourers were converging on his position. They will not make it, Thexvor said quietly. They are burdened with civilians and surrounded. I am aware. Zixthor felt something unfamiliar in his chest. The humans were going to die because they had refused to accept logical casualties. It was wasteful and pointless. 10 minutes passed. Jake's signal kept moving. Explosions registered on the scanners. The humans were fighting their way through. Then a new voice came through the communication channel. Young and scared. Command, this is Private Danny Cruz. We've got a problem. There's a major tunnel junction ahead. The Devourers are using it to bring in reinforcements. If we try to go through, they'll kill the civilians. Zixthor brought up the tunnel schematics. Danny Cruz was correct. The junction was a bottleneck. The Devourers were pouring through it. Captain Morrison, you must find another route. Zixthor said. There is no other route, Commander. The other tunnels collapsed. Jake's voice was calm. Danny, you sure about this? Yes, sir. It's the only way. What are they discussing? Zixthor demanded. Jake answered. Private Cruz is going to collapse the junction. Cut off the Devourer reinforcements. Give us time to get the civilians out. That will require explosives placed manually at multiple load-bearing points. Whoever plants them will not have time to escape before detonation. I know, Commander. It was Danny's voice now. It's okay. Just make sure my mom gets my letters. They're in my footlocker on Luna Base. Zixthor's 3 eyes widened. You are volunteering to die? I'm volunteering to save 200 people and 20 of my brothers and sisters. Danny's voice was steady despite his youth. That's a pretty good trade. It is not logical. You are probably terrified? Danny laughed, but it sounded forced. Yeah, I am. But Captain Morrison taught us something. Being scared doesn't mean you don't act. It means you act anyway. Tell my mom I love her. Cruise out, the communication cut off. Zixthor watched the scanners helplessly. Small explosions registered at the tunnel junction. Then one massive detonation. The entire tunnel system shook. The junction collapsed, cutting off the Devourer reinforcements. Danny Cruz's life sign disappeared from the display. Commander, his officer said quietly. Captain Morrison's unit is moving again. They're approaching the evacuation zone. 20 minutes later, Jake and his Marines emerged from the tunnels. They carried civilians on their backs and shoulders. Their armor was scorched and damaged. Several Marines limped with obvious injuries, but they had all 200 civilians with them. Zixthor watched the evacuation ships lift off. The last Devourer forces were being driven back by orbital bombardment. The colony was lost, but most of its people were saved. By standard calculations, the operation was a success, but Zixthor could not stop thinking about the young human who had blown himself up in a tunnel. Danny Cruz had been barely into adulthood. He should have had decades of life ahead of him. Instead, he had chosen death to save others. When Jake came aboard the command ship, Zixthor confronted him immediately. You violated direct orders. You risked your entire unit for 200 civilians. One of your soldiers is dead." Jake looked at him with tired eyes. His face was covered in dust and dried blood. "Yes, sir. All of that is true. By what logic did you make this decision? We don't leave people behind, ever. That's not just words, Commander. That's who we are." Jake's voice was quiet but firm. Danny knew the risks. He made his choice. And because of him, 200 families still have their loved ones. 20 Marines are still alive. That's not a waste. That's a warrior's death with meaning. Your species values individual lives over tactical advantage. This will lead to defeat. Maybe. Or maybe it makes us fight harder because we know our people would do the same for us. Jake wiped his face. "With respect, Commander, you see Danny's death as a loss. I see it as a gift. He gave everything so others could live. That's the kind of soldier I want beside me in battle." Sixth Thor had no response to that. In Krillian culture, warriors died for tactical objectives, not for emotional reasons. They died to advance military goals, not to save small groups of civilians trapped behind enemy lines. That night, Sixth Thor reviewed the battle footage. He watched Danny Cruz place the explosives with shaking hands. The young human had been terrified. His vital signs had shown extreme stress. But he had completed his task and triggered the detonation without hesitation. He also watched the moment when Jake's unit reached the civilians. The humans had shared their water rations. They had given up their own armor to protect the wounded. They had carried people who could not walk, even though it slowed their escape and put them in greater danger. It made no logical sense. These humans were weaker and slower than most species. Their lifespans were short. They should have valued their own survival above all else. Instead, they threw themselves into danger for others without hesitation. Sixth Thor prepared his report for the Krillian High Command. He wrote about the successful evacuation. He included casualty numbers and resource expenditures. But he also wrote something else. The humans fight with a philosophy that contradicts standard military doctrine. They accept higher risks to protect individuals. They violate orders when they believe others are in danger. They volunteer for suicide missions to save their comrades. By all logical measures, this should make them weak. However, I have observed that this same philosophy creates a unity and determination that cannot be easily calculated. Further observation is required. He sent the report and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, the Devourer fleet was gathering for another attack, and beside him, humanity was preparing to face them. Sixth Thor had fought beside many species across his career. He had commanded fleets and led ground assaults. He understood warfare in all its forms, but he was beginning to realize that he did not understand humans at all, and that made him deeply uncomfortable. 3 weeks into the pursuit, Sixth Thor was ready to call off the chase. The joint fleet had been hunting a Devourer battle group through empty space, jumping from system to system, always one step behind. His Krillian crews were exhausted. The other alien species in the fleet had already begun requesting permission to return to base. "Commander, the Vexari contingent is withdrawing," Thex4 reported. "They cite crew fatigue and low morale. The Polix ships are requesting the same." Sixth Thor looked at the display. 8 ships were breaking formation, turning back toward Council space. That left his Krillian vessels and the human ships. 20 warships total pursuing a Devourer force of similar size. "What is the status of the human vessels?" Sixth Thor asked. "All operational and maintaining pursuit speed. Captain Morrison reports his crews are ready to continue." That made no sense. The humans had been awake and working just as long as everyone else. Their ships were older and required more maintenance. They should be the first to request withdrawal, not the last. Sixth Thor opened a direct channel to Jake's ship. "Captain Morrison, your fleet has been in continuous operation for 21 days. Your crews must be exhausted." Jake's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired but alert. "We're doing fine, Commander. Rotating shifts every 8 hours. Crews are staying sharp. The other species are withdrawing due to fatigue. You see no need to rest?" "Oh, we're tired. But the Devourers are still running, which means we keep chasing. That's how this works." "How what works?" "Persistence hunting, Commander. It's in our DNA," Jake smiled. "See, humans evolved as endurance predators. We're not the fastest or strongest, but we can keep going longer than almost anything else on our planet. We used to chase prey animals for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. Then we'd walk up and finish them off. Zixthor felt his scales shift uncomfortably. You are comparing this military operation to primitive hunting? I'm saying we're built for long chases. Other species sprint. We marathon. The Devourers have been running for 3 weeks. They're probably exhausted making mistakes. That's when they're vulnerable. After the conversation ended, Zixthor sat in his command chair thinking. He accessed the human database and searched for information about endurance. What he found disturbed him. Humans could run for hours without stopping. They had competitions where individuals would run for over 24 hours continuously. Some humans had crossed entire continents on foot. They had a cooling system based on sweating that allowed them to regulate body temperature during extended activity. Their respiratory systems were optimized for steady, long-term effort, but it went beyond physical capability. Humans had a psychological resistance to giving up. Their history was filled with examples of individuals and groups that had survived impossible situations through sheer stubbornness. Sailors who had drifted at sea for months, explorers who had walked across frozen wastelands, soldiers who had fought against overwhelming odds simply because surrender was not acceptable to them. Zixthor realized that Jake was correct. Humans were not designed for quick victories. They were designed to outlast their opponents. On day 24 of the pursuit, they caught up to the Devourers. The enemy fleet had stopped in an empty system to make repairs. Zixthor's scanners showed obvious damage to several vessels. Their formation was loose and disorganized. They had clearly not expected anyone to chase them this far. All ships to battle stations, Zixthor ordered. Prepare to engage. The battle was brief and decisive. The Devourers were sluggish and uncoordinated. Their return fire was inaccurate. Within an hour, half their fleet was destroyed, and the rest was fleeing deeper into unexplored space. Zixthor's Krillian crews were struggling to maintain combat effectiveness. They had pushed past their recommended operational limits, but the humans were still sharp and focused, executing maneuvers with practiced precision. After the battle, Zixthor visited the human ship. He found Jake and his crew in their mess hall, celebrating the victory. They were eating, laughing, and sharing stories. Some were exhausted, but their spirits seemed high. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan approached him carrying 2 cups. Commander Zixthor, want to join us? This is coffee. It's a human stimulant. Helps us stay alert. Zixthor accepted the cup carefully. The liquid was dark and smelled bitter. He took a small sip. It tasted harsh but warming. Your people maintained combat readiness throughout the pursuit, he said. How? Kate smiled. Training and coffee mostly. But also we know how to pace ourselves. It's like running a marathon. You don't sprint at the start. You find your rhythm and maintain it. Save your energy for when you need it. Around them, human soldiers were talking. Zixthor listened to their conversations. They were telling stories from Earth's history. One soldier described something called the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 warriors had held off an army of thousands. Another talked about a siege called Stalingrad, where soldiers had fought in frozen ruins for months. A third mentioned the Apollo 13 mission, where humans had survived a dying spacecraft through improvisation and determination. Your species seems to celebrate failures, Zixthor observed. Not failures, Jake said, joining them. Close calls, times when we should have lost but didn't. Those stories remind us what we're capable of when everything goes wrong. They teach us that giving up is the only real failure. A young pilot named Tyler Grant spoke up. My grandfather used to say, "It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." That's from an old movie, but it's kind of our whole philosophy. The Devourers do not share this philosophy, Zixthor said. They adapt and evolve. They learn from defeat and become stronger. Sure, Jake agreed. But evolution takes time. Stubbornness works right now. We just chase them down every time, wear them out and hit them when they're tired. Eventually they'll realize we're not worth the energy to fight. Zixthor spent several more hours with the human crew. He watched them maintain their equipment with tired but steady hands. He observed their shift changes, noting how they briefed each other thoroughly to maintain continuity. He saw them check on each other, making sure everyone was eating and resting adequately. They functioned as a unit in ways that went beyond military training. They cared for each other with a casual intimacy that Krillian warriors did not share. When one soldier seemed overwhelmed, others would pull them aside and talk quietly. When someone made a mistake, the correction was gentle and constructive. They supported each other not through rigid discipline but through genuine concern. That night, Zixthor could not sleep. He kept thinking about the pursuit. 3 weeks of steady, relentless pressure. Most species would have given up or required rest. But the humans had simply kept going day after day, never questioning whether they should stop. It was efficient in its own way. Not the calculated efficiency of Krillian warfare, but something more primal. The efficiency of a predator that knows its prey will eventually tire and fall. Zixthor had hunted many enemies across his career. But he had never thought of warfare as hunting. Battles were solved through tactical superiority and strategic planning. You fought, you won or lost, and then you regrouped. Humans did not think that way. To them, every battle was just one moment in a longer struggle. If they lost today, they would come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. They would keep coming until either they won or they were completely destroyed. For the first time, Zixthor understood why the Devourers had started avoiding human space. It was not because humans were stronger or had better weapons. It was because fighting humans was exhausting. They never stopped. They never accepted defeat. They never let you rest. Zixthor composed another report to the Krillian High Command. Human military effectiveness cannot be measured by traditional standards. Their advantage lies not in superior technology or tactical brilliance, but in psychological endurance. They possess an almost pathological inability to accept defeat. Combined with their physical endurance capabilities, this makes them extremely dangerous in prolonged conflicts. Recommendation: any species planning military action against humanity should prepare for extended campaigns measured in years rather than battles measured in days. He sent the report and looked at the star charts. The Devourer main fleet was still out there, growing stronger with each world they consumed. Soon there would be a major confrontation. The humans would be there fighting beside him. Zixthor had begun to understand what humans were capable of when chasing an enemy. But he had not yet seen what they became when cornered and defending something they cared about. That revelation was still to come, and he was not certain he wanted to witness it. The Devourer ambush at Tarsus Station was perfect. They had hidden their fleet behind a gas giant and waited until the joint forces entered the system. By the time Zixthor realized the trap, it was too late. Enemy ships swarmed from every direction. The battle turned chaotic immediately. Zixthor fought to maintain fleet cohesion while Devourer vessels tore into his formations. His tactical display showed ships winking out one after another. The humans were fighting hard, but they were outnumbered 4-1. "Commander, the refugee transport is under attack," Thexvor reported. Multiple Devourer fighters closing on its position. Zixthor's 3 eyes focused on the display. The transport carried civilians evacuated from the border colonies. Over 3,000 people, including families with children. It had minimal weapons and no real armor. "Dispatch 3 frigates to provide escort," Zixthor ordered. The frigates moved to intercept, but they were too far away. Zixthor watched helplessly as Devourer weapons tore through the transport's hull. The ship broke apart in a silent explosion. 3,000 life signs disappeared from his scanners in an instant. The communication channels filled with voices, human voices. They were not screaming or panicking. They were absolutely silent for 5 full seconds. Then Jake's voice came through and Zixthor barely recognized it. "All human vessels." Jake's voice was cold and empty, like ice cracking underfoot. "Weapons free. No quarter. No prisoners. No mercy. Captain Morrison, we need to maintain tactical formation," Zixthor began. "Negative, Commander." The coldness in Jake's voice made Zixthor's scales prickle. "We just watched our families die. Those were our people, our children. The Devourers just made this personal." Zixthor watched his tactical display transform. The human ships abandoned defensive positions and surged forward into the Devourer formations. But this was not the reckless charge he had seen at Outpost 7. This was something else entirely. The humans fought with calculated fury. Every shot was aimed and measured. Every maneuver had a purpose. They took risks, but each risk was precisely calibrated to cause maximum damage. It was mathematics translated into violence, rage channeled through training and discipline. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's voice came through the communication channel, directing her ship's weapons. "Target their propulsion systems first. Make them slow. Make them watch us coming." A fighter pilot named Tyler Grant reported engine failure. His fighter was damaged and losing power. Instead of ejecting, he aimed his dying craft directly at a devourer carrier. "This is for the families. Tyler Grant signing off." The fighter struck the carrier's command bridge at full speed. The explosion tore through the devourer ship's critical systems. It drifted, bleeding atmosphere and debris. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human crews fought with a ferocity that Zixthor had never witnessed. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as rams. When their ships were boarded, they fought with knives and bare hands. When they were cornered, they sang war songs that echoed across the open communication channels. Zixthor's communication officer looked shaken. "Commander, I am recording audio from multiple human vessels. Should I filter it?" "Let me hear it." The bridge filled with human voices singing. The words were in their ancient language, something about standing firm and not yielding ground. The melody was harsh and rhythmic, like a beating heart. It was not beautiful by any standard Zixthor knew, but it was powerful. It spoke of defiance and determination and absolute refusal to surrender. "They are performing psychological warfare," Thexvor said quietly, "against themselves as much as the enemy. They are using emotion to enhance their combat effectiveness. That is not possible. Emotion is a weakness in combat." "Then explain what we are witnessing." Zixthor had no explanation. The humans were fighting like nothing he had ever seen. They were not berserkers throwing themselves into death. They were controlled, focused, and absolutely lethal. But beneath that control was something burning hot and dangerous. The devourers began to retreat. Zixthor's scanners showed it clearly. The enemy fleet was breaking off engagement and withdrawing. It was the first time in recorded history that the devourers had shown tactical withdrawal in the face of smaller numbers. They were fleeing from the humans. After the battle, Zixthor found Sergeant Ben Hayes sitting alone in a human ship's cargo bay. The large man was crying quietly, his shoulders shaking. Zixthor almost turned away, but something made him approach. "Sergeant Hayes, we achieved victory today." Ben looked up with red eyes. "Did we? Because it feels like we lost. Those were our people on that transport, Commander. Families, children, we failed them." "You did not fail. The ambush was beyond prediction. The transport's destruction was not preventable. Doesn't matter. They died and we couldn't stop it." Ben wiped his face roughly. "You know what the worst part is? Knowing that we'll carry this. Every single one of us. We'll remember their faces and their names, and we'll wonder if we could have done something different. Your species connects death with failure. This is inefficient. Maybe. But it's also why we fight so hard. Because we know what it costs when we lose." Zixthor found Jake on the bridge of his ship. The captain was staring at a display showing casualty numbers. His face was carefully blank, but his hands were gripping the console hard enough that his knuckles were white. "Your people fought with unexpected intensity," Zixthor said carefully. "We lost 3,000 civilians, Commander. Men, women, children. They trusted us to protect them and we failed. By what logic did you fail? The ambush was perfectly executed. Casualties were inevitable." Jake turned to look at him. His eyes were tired and filled with something Zixthor was starting to recognize. Pain. Deep personal pain. "You asked me once how we make our decisions," Jake said quietly. "You wanted to know our logic. Here it is, Commander. We don't fight because we're not afraid. We fight because we are afraid. Afraid of losing what matters. Afraid of letting down the people who depend on us. Afraid that our failures will cost innocent lives. Fear is a weakness, no." Jake's voice was firm. "Fear is a tool. It sharpens us, makes us focus, reminds us what we're fighting for. Those devourers killed our families today, so we made them pay for it. That's not weakness. That's what happens when you hurt what humans love." Zixthor thought about the battle. He remembered the cold fury in human voices, the calculated risks that had decimated the devourer fleet, the willingness to sacrifice individual ships to achieve tactical advantages. "You weaponize your emotions," he said slowly. "We channel them. Fear, anger, love, grief. We feel them all and we use them to keep fighting. Because if we didn't feel anything, what would be the point? We'd just be machines following orders. But we're not machines. We're humans. And when you threaten what we care about, you learn exactly what that means." That night, Zixthor reviewed the battle footage again. He watched Tyler Grant's final run. He watched human boarding parties fight through devourer ships with weapons and fists and teeth. He watched crews sing their war songs while firing weapons and making repairs and calling out tactical information. They had been terrified. The biological readouts showed stress hormones at dangerous levels. Their heart rates had been elevated. Some had been shaking with adrenaline. By every measure, they had been experiencing intense fear. But they had not run. They had not broken. They had taken that fear and transformed it into something else, something that made them more dangerous, not less. Zixthor prepared another report, but this time his claws hesitated over the keys. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he make the Krillian High Command understand that fear was not always a weakness, that emotions could enhance combat effectiveness rather than diminish it? Finally, he wrote, I have observed humans in their most dangerous state. When defending what they love, they become something beyond normal military logic. They fight with controlled rage that makes them extremely effective. Recommendation: never threaten what humans care about. The cost is too high. He sent the report and sat in darkness thinking. For the first time in his career, Zixthor understood something that had always eluded his logical mind. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was action taken despite fear, and humans possessed courage in quantities that made them the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. The final battle with the Devourer main fleet was approaching. Zixthor would fight beside humans again, and now he knew what they would become when the stakes were highest. For the first time in his life, Commander Zixthor felt something he had never experienced before. Something cold and heavy in his chest, something that made his claws tremble slightly. He felt fear, not of the Devourers, but of what his human allies would do to protect their worlds. And that fear told him something important. He had finally begun to think like a human. The Devourer home system appeared on the scanners like a wound in space. 15 planets all consumed and restructured into hive ships and breeding grounds. The enemy fleet numbered in the thousands. This was their source, their origin point. Destroy it and the Devourer threat would be broken for generations. The joint fleet gathered at the system's edge. Zixthor commanded over 200 vessels from a dozen species. The humans contributed 38 ships. It was not enough. By Zixthor's calculations, they needed 3 times their current force for a successful assault. The War Council met to discuss strategy. Zixthor presented his plan on the holographic display. We establish a siege perimeter, cut off their supply lines, starve them out over the course of several months. Commander Ryan Mitchell, who led the human fleet, shook his head. That gives them time to adapt and evolve. The Devourers learn from every encounter. A long siege plays to their strengths. The alternative is a direct assault, Zixthor said. Casualties would be unacceptable. We would lose 60% of our forces even in the best scenario. Jake leaned forward. Then we need to make it quick and devastating. Hit them hard before they can coordinate a defense. Target the central hive structure. Without their command node, the fleet will be disorganized. That structure is protected by their entire fleet. Any ship attempting to reach it would be destroyed. Not if we give them too many targets to track. Jake pulled up a tactical overlay. We split into small groups. Fast attack runs from multiple vectors. Keep them confused and reacting instead of planning. Then a strike team goes in on foot to plant explosives at the hive core. A suicide mission, Zixthor stated flatly. A difficult mission, Jake corrected, but possible. The council voted. The Krillian representatives sided with Zixthor. The other species were divided. The humans unanimously supported Jake's plan. In the end, they compromised. They would attempt a limited assault to test the defenses. If it failed, they would fall back to a siege. The battle began at dawn cycle, though there was no sun to rise. The fleet spread into attack formations and surged forward. The Devourers met them with overwhelming force, space filled with weapons fire and explosions. Zixthor coordinated from his flagship, directing forces with practiced efficiency, but the Devourers adapted quickly. They countered every tactic within minutes. The assault was failing. All forces begin withdrawal, Zixthor ordered. Negative, command. It was Jake's voice. We're pushing through. The hive is within reach. Captain Morrison, you are surrounded. Your ship is taking heavy damage. Withdraw immediately. Can't do that, Commander. We've got civilians on those outer planets. If we don't end this now, the Devourers will keep expanding. Keep consuming. This stops here. Zixthor watched his display in horror. Jake's ship drove deeper into the Devourer formation, taking fire from all sides. Its shields were failing. Its weapons were overheating. but it kept moving forward. Then Devourer boarding craft latched onto Jake's hull. Enemy forces were breaching the ship. "Captain Morrison, you are being boarded. You must retreat." "Little busy right now, Commander." The sound of weapons fire came through the channel. "All Marines fall back to engineering. Protect the reactor." Zixthor made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he possessed. "All Krillian vessels follow me. We are going to retrieve Captain Morrison's crew." Thexivor turned to him. "Commander, that will break our defensive formation. We will be vulnerable." "I am aware. Do it anyway." His flagship and 5 Krillian cruisers broke formation and drove toward Jake's position. The other council ships hesitated, then followed. Suddenly, the entire fleet was pushing forward instead of retreating. "What are you doing?" Zixthor demanded. Commander Ryan Mitchell answered. "You're going to save our people. We're not letting you do that alone. All ships, full assault. Cover the commander." The battle transformed. What should have been a retreat became a desperate push. Ships that should have withdrawn instead drove deeper into enemy territory. It was madness. It violated every principle of tactical warfare, but it worked. The Devourers had prepared for a methodical battle. They had not prepared for an entire fleet to throw away their defensive positions and charge forward together. Their formations broke. Their coordination faltered. Zixthor's flagship reached Jake's ship and latched on. Krillian boarding teams cut through the hull and entered the human vessel. They found Jake and his Marines holding the engineering section. The floor was covered in Devourer dead. The humans were exhausted, bleeding, and down to their last ammunition reserves. But they were singing. It was the same war song Zixthor had heard at Tarsus Station. The words about standing firm and holding ground. They sang it between shooting and reloading and calling out warnings to each other. "Captain Morrison," Zixthor said over the communication channel. "This is Commander Zixthor. We are evacuating your crew." Jake looked up at the Krillian soldiers with surprise and something else. Respect. Maybe even gratitude. "Took you long enough, Commander. Let's get out of here." The evacuation was brutal. They fought their way back through corridors filled with Devourers. Zixthor found himself fighting beside human Marines, covering each other's movements in the close confines. A Marine named Sam Torres saved his life, shooting a Devourer that had gotten behind him. They made it back to the Krillian flagship with minutes to spare. Jake's ship exploded behind them, taking several Devourer vessels with it. But the battle was not over. The fleet had penetrated deep into the Devourer formation. The hive structure was ahead, massive and pulsing with organic technology. "All ships concentrate fire on the hive core," Zixthor ordered. "Everything we have." The combined fleet unleashed its full arsenal. Plasma beams and missiles and kinetic weapons hammered into the hive structure. It burned and cracked and slowly collapsed. The Devourer fleet lost cohesion as their command structure died. The battle turned into a rout. The Devourers scattered. The joint fleet pressed the advantage, destroying ships and installations. By the time the fighting stopped, the hive system was broken. It would take the Devourers decades to rebuild, if they ever did. Zixthor sat in his command chair, exhausted in ways he had never experienced. His body was unharmed, but his mind felt strained. He had violated tactical doctrine. He had risked his entire fleet for a single ship. He had made decisions based not on logic, but on something else. Jake appeared on his bridge, escorted by Krillian guards. His armor was scorched and damaged. His face was tired but smiling. "Thank you, Commander. You saved my crew. We don't forget things like that. I made an illogical decision. I should have maintained the withdrawal. But you didn't. You came back for us. That's what we do. What you just learned to do." Jake extended his hand. "You fought like a human today, Commander Zixthor. That's the highest compliment I can give." Zixthor looked at the offered hand. In human culture, it was a gesture of respect and friendship. He reached out and grasped it carefully. "I learned from you," Zixthor admitted. "You showed me that fear is not a weakness. That emotion can be a weapon. That protecting your people is more important than protecting your tactics. And what you taught us is just as valuable. You gave us structure and coordination. You helped us channel our instincts into effective strategy. We're better together than we ever were apart." The final reports came in over the following days. Casualties had been high but acceptable. The Devourer threat was broken. Human space was safe. Council space was safe. The victory would be remembered for generations. Zixthor prepared his final report to the Krillian High Command. His claws moved slowly over the keys as he chose his words carefully. I recommend full military alliance with humanity, but with awareness of their capabilities. Humans are the most dangerous species I have encountered in my career. They are dangerous not because they are strong or fast or numerous. They are dangerous because they refuse to accept defeat. Because they transform fear into courage. Because they value their people above tactical considerations. Because they will fight to the last breath for what they believe in. I have fought beside many warriors, but I have never fought beside anyone like humans. They are terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. Any species that faces them in battle should prepare not for a war of logistics but for a war of wills. And in that kind of war, humans will always have the advantage. I entered this conflict believing I understood warfare. I leave it knowing I understood nothing. The humans taught me that there are things more important than logic. Loyalty, courage, sacrifice, these are not weaknesses. They are the foundations of strength. I never knew fear until I fought beside humans, but I also never knew what true courage looked like. They are the bravest cowards in the galaxy, and I am honored to call them allies. Several weeks later, Zixthor found himself on Luna Base again. The humans had invited him to a memorial service for the fallen. He stood among the crowd as they read names and shared stories. They cried and laughed and remembered together. Jake found him afterward carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Zixthor, who accepted it. The bitter taste had become familiar. To the brave cowards, Jake said, raising his cup. Zixthor understood the phrase now. It captured the human paradox perfectly. They were afraid, but they fought anyway. They knew the costs.